We warmly welcome you all to another episode of the Wilderness Insight, which is a project done by the Wilderness and Wildlife Protection Society of Royal College, where we interview professionals related to the wildlife conservation field. My name is Malith Pathiratne, and I have my colleague Dharmaratne from the Senior Committee of the Wilderness and Wildlife Protection Society. And today we will be hosting today's discussion with Mr. Pruthuviraj Fernando. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
So, sir, before we move on to our first topic of discussion, sir, could you briefly tell us about your life in school and how it influenced you to become the person you are today?
Well, I guess my time at Royal broadened my outlook and taught me, to associate with people and interact with them. So I think that was also, it's a time that I enjoyed very much. So I think it was very good grounding for what I did later on with life.
So could you elaborate on that piece a bit more?
Well, when we were in school, there were a lot of, there were a number of parallel classes. So there were a lot of students from very different walks of life, different ethnicities. So I think that gave us a very broad outlook on life, and being friends with lots of different types of people, I think is a very important aspect of being able to get along in the world. And also, Royal College is it's a fairly big school, so there were a lot of students, and there was also, while there was always a very friendly atmosphere and interaction, there was also quite a bit of competition as far as studies and sports and things were concerned. So I think all these things gives you a very rounded outlook in life. And I think that was a very important aspect of my early years.
Thank you, sir. Moving on. So how would you describe wildlife management? We know you are specialized in helping fight for the protection of elephants. And could you please also explain what you have done in order to protect these wonderful creatures?
Yeah, so wildlife management is basically, it has different aspects to it. So clearly, one of the important aspects of wildlife management is conservation. So you would need to manage the environment that animals are in, as well as you might have to manage the animals in order to ensure their conservation. But when it comes to elephants, there is an added aspect, because elephants are the cause of what's refers to human-elephant conflict. So in human-elephant conflict, yes, it is an issue for the conservation of elephants. So from that point of view, that the conflict needs to be managed. But on the other hand, managing the conflict also requires the managing of elephants. So wildlife management has these different aspects centered around the conservation of wildlife. But that does not mean that wildlife management means that you are trying to protect every single animal. In wildlife management, what is more important is to ensure the survival of the species, and sometimes that might be even at the cost of an individual.
So moving on to the second question, sir. Sir, why do you think elephants are important to the wildlife, like for the ecosystem?
Elephants, I would say primarily elephants are amazing animals. I mean, they are the largest animals on land. They are very, very different to any other animal. They have this huge, trunk, which no other animal has. Elephants, when you just look at an elephant, it's an amazing animal. And then elephants are also amazingly interesting because they are quite intelligent. They have a very complex social organizations, a social system. So and they have very interesting behaviors. So from all these aspects, they are very interesting. But in addition, elephants also have importance in other ways. Sometimes they're considered the keystone species. That means a keystone is a stone that is, if you have an arch that is built in a house or something, the central stone is what keeps the arch together, and that's called a keystone. So if you take that out, the whole arch collapses. So elephants are sometimes considered a keystone species in the habitats that they are in, because they have a fair amount of impact on the habitat. So elephants being there impacts a lot of other species, other plants, other animals. So in that sense, they have a lot of effects on other species. But in addition to that, they are also what's known as an umbrella species. That is, elephants require very large areas. So if you want to conserve elephants, you have to protect and conserve large areas. And that means all the other animals that are in that area are also getting conserved. So if you can focus on elephant conservation, and the elephant is like an umbrella that also gives shelter to a lot of other species if you are going to conserve elephants. And then finally, elephants are also called a flagship species because everybody in the world loves elephants. So when you say you want to conserve elephants, everybody is usually in agreement with that and is willing to help. Whereas if you say you want to conserve some little gecko or some frog or some fish, there might not be that much enthusiasm, although from a biological point of view, an elephant is a species and every single fish or frog or lizard is also another species and equally important. But when you consider people's perception, it's easy to convince people of the importance for conservation using charismatic animals like elephants. So they are also called the flagship species for conservation. And then, of course, as Sri Lankans, elephants are very important for us from our cultural and religious point of view. So I think elephants are important in very many ways.
Agreed there, sir. Moving on, sir, you mentioned the human-elephant conflict before. So could you please tell what you have done to solve this big issue that our country is facing?
Well, we haven't solved it yet, and we have a long way to go. So so the problem is elephants are attracted to crops because crops are things, I mean, if you take the things that we grow as crops, these were originally plants that were found naturally in the environment. But people have sort of domesticated them and improved them by crossbreeding, by managing them for thousands of years to make them much more nutritious. Their produce is much more palatable, it's very tasty, and they are grown in very high concentration. So elephants are very greatly also attracted to most of the crops that we eat. So if you grow crops in an area with elephants, elephants are going to come and try to eat the crops. So elephants raid. And then if you take something like paddy, to which they are very, very attracted, you harvest the paddy and store it in the house, the elephant gets the smell of harvested stored paddy, he might come and break the house to get at the stored paddy. So this, and of course the people, if the people are willing to let the elephants eat all the crops that they grow with hard labor, then there wouldn't be a problem. But obviously people are not agreeable to that. So the people try to prevent the elephants from growing crops. And most of the ways they try to prevent are by confronting the elephants and being aggressive towards the elephant. So the problem is elephants are these huge, big, powerful animals. And when we confront such an animal and act with aggression towards that animal, they in turn act aggressively towards people. So this sort of leads to an arms race between people and elephants with increasing escalation of conflict. So what we have done is we have studied elephants as well as the human-elephant conflict. And we have tried, and based on the research that we have done, so we have done research on elephants for the past 30 years or so. And based on that, we have come up with possible solutions to this problem. And then we have pilot tested those solutions. And then we have adapted them to be more effective. And then we have proposed that these solutions be adopted by the government and implemented on a large scale so that human-elephant conflict can be mitigated effectively. So that's kind of what we have been doing.
So do elephants come to human civilizations because lack of food for them in the forest, or because they the smell of the crops are nice, good for them?
Exactly. That's a very good question. I think a lot of people believe that elephants come out of the forest and come into villages either because there is not enough food for them in the forest or because there's disturbance in the forest. But actually, elephants come into areas with people, particularly villages or cultivations, because the food that we grow, the crops that we grow, are 100 times better than what is in the forest. So however much food there is in the forest, that food will never be as good as what we grow as crops. So I mean, it's just that it's the same as if we go into the forest and look for food, you will hardly find anything. You know, there might be some tree in fruit and maybe you can eat that fruit, but then to find another tree will take you probably hours or days. So there isn't that much food in the forest, particularly compared to cultivations. So cultivated areas are completely full of food. It's like comparing a supermarket with a tiny grocery store that is in the village. So there are 100 times more, 1,000 times more food in a human area, and also it is much, much, much better food. So that is why elephants are attracted to it.
Sir, don't you think the human civilization that have been made in elephant, the forest where elephant live is the main reason for elephants coming to crops? The humans have taken all the nourished soil and everything and planted their crops. So can't that be also reasons?
Well, I mean, so elephants, yes, elephants have lost a lot of the area that they used to be in because we have taken that over. And as you say, we have converted that to our settlements and crops. But the reason, but then that actually results in a lot of the elephants that were in the areas that were developed, they actually die because they cannot survive. So that would happen. So when you open up large areas and develop it for agriculture, immediately that will cause the loss of many elephants. So it might happen because of conflict, because people kill elephants. but also because they have lost a large area and there isn't enough food to go around. But after that, the elephants that remain in the remaining forest, they will still come out and raid, because now we are growing this very, very good food that is very attractive to elephants. So yeah, so both things actually happen.
Thank you, sir. Sir, moving on to next question, sir. Sir, what can we as a younger generation could do to contribute towards improving conservation and management of elephants?
Okay, so I think one of the biggest obstacles to effectively managing elephants, managing human-elephant conflict, managing wildlife, particularly in countries like ours, is that we don't take a scientific approach. We just believe in things because that is the way it was done previously. But I think what you all can do, you all need to do, the future generations, is to address problems based on knowledge and science. So if we have a problem, we first need to study that problem and understand that problem. And then through that, we can find solutions to that problem. So this is sort of is generally called the scientific approach. So I think it is important. I don't know whether you all are actually in science field or not, but even if you are not in a science field, whether you are doing commerce or arts or whatever, the scientific approach is not necessarily limited to the science field. To tackle any problem, we really need to understand that problem. We need to study that. And then we need to come up with, we can then think of how best to address that problem. And then we can try it out and see how it works. And then depending on that, maybe change how we are trying to address that problem. So this kind of approach, I think, is what is very important. And I think as the next generations, you all need to get used to that sort of analytical and scientific approach in addressing issues in life.
So moving on, has the COVID-19 pandemic interrupted any progress you all have had in mitigating this problem? Or
yeah, sure. So I mean, so a lot of our work, especially with regard to human-elephant conflict mitigation, is based on working with villagers. So all that has come to a stop because we can't go to villages and have meetings. So we help villagers put up electric fences around their village so they can protect themselves from elephants coming into the village. So all those programs have come to a stop. But the COVID has also had a lot of other impacts. As you know, the country currently is going through a very bad economic situation. And this will probably have very long-term, very severe repercussions because there is now a greater need, a greater drive, a greater desire to grow more of our own food. We are having import restrictions. And so in the future, it is likely that this will result in opening up even more areas for agriculture. And a lot of those areas might be areas that there are already elephants in. So that also, in that way, that also might have repercussions. We also do studies on elephant behavior and elephant social organization and things like that as more academic research in the protected areas in the parks. But as you know, because of the COVID, the parks are also closed. So all that has also come to a stop. So yeah, it has had a lot of impact.
Yes, sir. And sir, lastly, do you have any piece of advice for our viewers on how they can be more productive during these times?
Well, I mean, I think y'all as a group, there are things that y'all can do, because I mean the current situation will pass. You know, it's not going to last forever. But things like human-elephant conflict are very long-term things, and lots need to be done to manage that. So, and also from a point of view of elephant conservation. So when you talk about elephant conservation, one of the main ways that elephants come to harm, get killed, get injured in Sri Lanka are through things like snares, and a thing called hakkapatas, which is called a jaw bomb, which is a explosive device that is put inside something like a pumpkin, and when the animal bites on it, it explodes inside the mouth, breaking the jaws, destroying the tongue, and the animal starved to death. The snares also similarly, the trunks of elephants, especially babies, get caught in them and can get cut off completely, can get very badly injured. And then also currently electrocution of elephants is increasing regularly. So if the first two, the snares and hakkapatas or jaw bombs, are usually not directed towards elephants, but mainly used for obtaining bush meat. So wild boar meat, venison, deer meat. So I think you all could perhaps address issues like that. You all could, influence your friends, their families, not to eat bushmeat, because that results in a lot of harm to elephants. So I think you all, as a young group of people who are interested in conservation and wildlife, could perhaps do a awareness campaign about this, if at least maybe among your group, other friends and their families. So that might actually be helpful, because a lot of the demand for bushmeat is from people from the city who come to the outside areas. So if people don't reject bushmeat, then there will be less demand for that, and then there'll be less of these impacts on elephants. So I think that's something you could think about tackling.
And I think that concludes the questions and answers. Once again, sir, thank you for your time. We learned a lot, and hope you'll have success in all your future projects.
Thank you very much, and my appreciation for your doing this interview, and also wish you good luck and all the best in your studies and all your endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening, sir.